I've been towing trailers for probably 40 years now, including boat trailers, and I've never had a mishap. But quite recently I inspected the trailer and I realised just how close I'd come to a brake failure. The cable was about to fail, the brake pads had disintegrated, and when I inspected further and looked at the hubs, they had deteriorated badly. The bearing race was showing some chatter signs, even though I'd put new bearings in it only 12 months ago. So the question it raises is what went wrong? It had only been 12 months since I'd had the trailer surveyed for a roadworthy certificate, and it passed with flying colours. I delved deeper and pulled everything apart. Just about the only thing I could recover were the calipers. It's best if you can launch your boat without having to immerse the axle and the bearings, but I have no alternative with this boat. So the old galvanised cable had rusted and worn against a couple of friction points. So I replaced the cable with a 7x7 stainless cable and attached a couple of pulleys at points where it used to just go inside that eyelet, and of course it would wear through. I have to keep an eye on it and see how the 7x7 stainless is going to go, because some have suggested that it doesn't last very long, but given that there's no friction anywhere, hopefully I'll get a good run out of it. I added a couple of nylon blocks here to take the rub where it enters the chassis of the trailer. Then I took to the solid square axle, which had corroded badly with an angle grinder, and this is how I ended up looking after it. But the axle did look a lot better. I managed to reuse one of the hubs and replace the bearings in it so that I've got a spare wheel as opposed to just a spare tyre. The idea being that we do some very long trips, and most of the failures that you see are not because of a flat tyre, they're usually due to a bearing failure. We just got back from a 1,500 kilometre trip up to Great Keppel Island, and I wanted to take it apart and see how it was all holding up. The first step is to remove the two bolts that hold the calipers in place. So you'll need to release some of the tension on the cable and maybe just give it a little tap to free up the pads, and that means that the calipers can come away quite easily, and we'll take them inside and check them out on the bench. Notice how I've hand swaged the cable, which just eliminates another galvanised fitting that can corrode. As you can see, the pads have been wearing quite evenly and they're sitting in there quite freely, and you notice this time I've used marine grade pads. The ones that were put in there before were not marine grade, and consequently the backing plates just rusted away quite rapidly. So now it's time to remove the hub and rotor to inspect the bearings and see how they've stood up. Using products with a grease nipple to pack grease into the cavity has not worked for me, and the whole cavity inside ends up full of grease, pushes out the back of the hub, pops out the seal and sprays all over the rotor, and you saw the condition of the rotors that I removed there. Grease that spills out onto the rotors, as well as stopping your brakes from working properly, may have even caused them to overheat. So I've gone back to just manually inspecting the bearings on an annual basis, or more frequently if it's in the water and on the road a fair bit. So maybe I wasn't using them properly, but others have confirmed that they've had similar problems. So back to basics. I gave it a really decent road test and there's no signs of any problems there at all. They ran cool all the way. I check them every now and again. And if anything, the bearing's probably just a little bit dry. Need to be a little bit careful removing the hub so that you take the weight and it doesn't drop down and end up damaging the seal. The seal should actually remain on the stub. I'm removing the seal just to make sure that it hasn't been damaged in any way, and it's fine. Once you get the hub onto the bench, it's a bit easier to check out the seal and the inner bearing, which is a little bit difficult to get at because it's pressed in, and if you have to tap it out, you should throw it away and get a new one. But as long as it is running freely and not showing any sign of rumbling, then you should be okay, given that you know the history of it. It's a brand new bearing. There's no need to over grease the seal, just put enough in there to mostly fill the groove around the outside and you'll be fine, and then press it back onto the stub axle where it sits ready to receive the hub. I noticed the outer bearing looked a bit hungry, so I'm repacking it here. So again, you just apply enough grease and keep rotating it in the palm of your hand until you've pretty well filled the bearing until it won't take any more. I'm repacking the inside bearing, which can't really remove safely from the hub without possibly damaging it because it's pressed in there. So I pack as much in as I can from behind the bearing and just rotate it until it feels full, not filling the cavity in the hub. I'm just wiping down the rotor itself with some terps so that I can inspect the surface. There's no sign of any wear there, no cracking or any sign of any heat whatsoever, so all good. If you can see any sign at all of any chatter on where the bearing seats into the hub, then there's a problem, but in this case it all looks fine. Replace the seal over the stub axle with the wide part of the flange facing away from you, and you do this before placing the hub on the stub axle. This reduces the chance of damaging the seal. One of the really good things I noticed when I pulled this apart was, despite being immersed several times, there was no sign whatsoever of any water in the bearings. This is partly because I always give the bearings plenty of time to cool down before launching the boat. It's easy with the trailer sailor because it takes about 20 minutes to rig and gives the bearings plenty of time to cool down. Carefully place the hub over the stub axle and then reach over the back and press the seal into where it seats in the hub. It's time to replace the outer bearing, followed by the washer, and the crown nut, which only needs to be tightened just past hand tight. Once you get a firm feel there without overdoing it, just back it off to the first hole that you can fit the split pin in. Now you can tap the cover back into place. Once you've got that seated in there nicely, job done. Now it's time to replace the calipers. and it's probably not a bad idea to use a torque wrench on the 2 bolts that hold it in place. You can reattach the cable now. I'm using a stainless steel shackle there, and after that you'll need to adjust all the tensions on the cable just to get the right amount of braking pressure. You need to put about 10% minimum of the combined weight of the trailer and the boat as down pressure on the ball. You can see the setup here helps you to weigh the down force on the ball using bathroom scales. In this case, I adjusted the weight back to 10% by moving the winch post back just a little bit. Surprising how much effect a small adjustment there makes. For some people it might involve moving the axle back, but for me it was much easier just to move the winch post back and then to make a couple of adjustments on the rollers, and pretty soon we're on the road again. And of course, never forgetting that the whole reason for doing this stuff is so that we can go sailing. So the next video I'm going to put out is about restoring the inside of Mozart prior to heading up to Great Keppel Island, where we had a great sail for about 3 or 4 days in one of the most beautiful places in Australia, if not the world. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button, and if you click on the bell, you'll get a little reminder will pop up when the next video is released. So I'm going to show the entire fit out of Mozart and then some sailing adventures when we get back on the water. Hope to see you back here soon.